My husband joked about my salary at dinner. He didn't know I had already resigned. He laughed when he said it, not loudly, not in a way that demanded attention, just enough for everyone at the table to hear, just enough to make it feel intentional, while still giving him room to claim it was harmless if anyone reacted. I smiled too. Because correcting him would have ruined the moment. His friends joined in. Someone raised a glass. Someone said, "At least you're honest." What none of them knew was that my last working day had already passed. My badge was returned. My email was shut down. And the decision I made that morning was about to change who had the power in that marriage. I didn't say a word at dinner. I let him finish the joke. We were seated in a private dining room at a restaurant in downtown Chicago. One of those places with low lighting, linen tablecloths, and servers who move quietly like they're trained not to interrupt important conversations. The windows overlooked the river, and the city lights reflected off the water in long, soft streaks. It was the kind of setting where people talked about deals, promotions, and numbers without ever raising their voices. The conversation had shifted to work, the way it always did when my husband felt comfortable. His friends from his firm were there, along with their partners. Someone had just asked what I did, and before I could answer, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "She keeps busy," he said casually, swirling the wine in his glass. "Doesn't make much, but she likes feeling productive." There it was, delivered smoothly, cleanly, wrapped in a tone that made it sound like a compliment if you didn't listen too closely. A few people laughed, not the loud kind, the polite kind. Someone lifted their glass and said, "At least you're honest." Another person nodded like this was a normal thing to say about a spouse. I smiled too. I had perfected that smile over the years. Soft, controlled, cooperative. The kind of smile that signals you're not offended, that you understand the joke, that you won't make anyone uncomfortable by pushing back. Correcting him would have ruined the moment, and moments like this mattered to him more than anything. What none of them knew was that my last working day had already passed. That morning, I had walked out of a glass office building on Wacker Drive for the final time. I had handed my badge to the security desk, signed a form, and watched my email access shut down at noon. My manager looked surprised but not shocked. We both knew this had been coming, even if we'd never said it out loud. I didn't tell my husband, not because I was afraid, not because I wasn't sure, but because I wanted to see how long he would keep talking when he thought he still had control. At the dinner table, I didn't say a word. I let him finish the joke. I let him enjoy the laughter, the approval, the sense that he was being admired. He sat there relaxed, confident, one arm resting on the back of his chair like he owned the room. I watched him from across the table and felt something unexpected. Nothing, no embarrassment, no anger, just a quiet numbness, the kind that comes after you've already made a decision and there's nothing left to debate inside yourself. This wasn't the first time he had done this. Public settings were always his favorite. Restaurants, dinner parties, holiday gatherings, he never insulted me outright. That would have been too obvious, too easy to challenge. Instead, he framed everything as humor. As for transparency, as playful honesty. She's not really career-driven like that. She prefers stability over ambition. She doesn't need much. Each comment followed by a smile, a light touch on my arm, a look that said, "Don't make this awkward." For years, I hadn't. Humiliation isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the heat that rises in your chest while everyone else keeps eating. It's the way the conversation moves on as if nothing happened, while something inside you folds in on itself and stays there. At dinner, I noticed things I had stopped noticing before. The way no one looked at me directly after he spoke. The way someone changed the subject a little too quickly. The way he didn't notice any of it because he was too busy enjoying the attention. The waiter returned to take our order. My husband ordered for both of us without asking, like he always did. I nodded when the waiter glanced at me for confirmation. Across the table, one of his colleagues smiled and said, "You're lucky, not everyone gets to take it easy." Lucky, that word used to sting. That night, it barely registered. Because earlier that day, sitting alone in my car along the river, I had already accepted that whatever version of myself he thought he controlled no longer existed. The decision to resign hadn't been dramatic. There was no argument. No final blow-up. Just a quiet moment at my desk, staring at an email asking me to adjust expectations after I requested flexibility I had already earned. The same flexibility my husband praised in theory but resented at home. I realized then that I had been shrinking in two places at once. At work, I was expected to be grateful. At home, I was expected to be small, and I was tired. I didn't quit impulsively. I had checked my savings months earlier. I knew exactly how long I could support myself. I had documents saved, accounts separated, options I never talked about. I didn't need permission, and I didn't need to announce it. At dinner, my husband launched into another story about his firm, about long hours and sacrifices, about how success required tough choices. He glanced at me when he said that last part, like it was a shared understanding. I nodded. Inside, I drifted back to the first time he had joked about money. We weren't married yet, just dating, sitting in a bar in Lincoln Park. Someone asked what I earned, and he answered before I could. "She's not doing it for the money," he'd said, "which is good because there isn't much." I remembered laughing then, brushing it off, telling myself he was confident that I was being sensitive. I spent years explaining him to myself, sanding down the sharp edges in my own head so I wouldn't have to confront what they were cutting. On the drive home, he hummed along to the radio. The city lights blurred past the windshield. He talked about the wine, the conversation, how well the night went. At a red light near Michigan Avenue, he glanced over at me. "You were quiet tonight," he said. "Everything okay?" I nodded. "Just tired," he smiled. "Long day?" "Yes," I said. "You could say that." He squeezed my hand briefly, automatically, and turned his attention back to the road. That night, standing alone in the kitchen while he showered upstairs, I felt detached in a way I had never felt before. Not sad, not relieved, just distant. When I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling, I realized how many versions of me he still believed existed. The accommodating one, the grateful one, the one who would always adjust. He didn't know that version had already left. I fell asleep easily. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It starts quietly, the way most real changes do, long before anyone else notices. For years, my husband had spoken about money as if it were a shared resource, but it was always clear whose hands were actually on the wheel. He didn't need to say it directly. He said it through jokes, through assumptions, through the way decisions were made without discussion and framed afterward as common sense. I used to tell myself it was efficiency, that he was decisive, organized, responsible. I convinced myself that letting him handle things was a relief, not a surrender. It was easier to believe that than to admit how often my voice disappeared in the process. Even before I resigned, there were patterns I couldn't ignore anymore. He commented on purchases I made with my own money, even small ones. He asked questions that sounded curious but landed like audits. He compared our contributions in ways that felt mathematical, as if our worth could be reduced to percentages on a spreadsheet. Whenever I brought it up, he laughed. "You're reading too much into it," he'd say. Or, "I'm just joking." You know that? And I did know. I knew exactly what he was doing. I just hadn't decided yet what to do about it. The day after the dinner, everything felt normal on the surface. He left early for work, kissed me on the cheek, told me he'd be late. I stayed home, drinking coffee by the window, watching the city wake up. The river moved slowly below, unbothered, steady. I liked that about it. I didn't rush to explain anything. I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. For once, I wasn't waiting for the right moment. I had already had it. The first crack came 3 days later. It was small, almost insignificant. A notification on his phone while we were sitting on the couch. He frowned, tapped the screen, then frowned again. I watched him from the corner of my eye, pretending to read, noticing how his jaw tightened just slightly. "Did you pay the credit card?" he asked, casual but distracted. "No," I said. "Why, I thought it was auto-paid." He tapped again. "It didn't go through." That was new. I handled those things more often than not, quietly, without comment. It was easier than listening to him explain interest rates or consequences like I hadn't lived in the world before him. "Oh," I said. "I didn't." He looked up at me then, really looked like he was recalibrating. "Why not?" I shrugged. "I didn't think it was urgent." He stared for a moment longer, then laughed. "Okay, just to take care of it tomorrow." I nodded. Tomorrow came and went. So did the next day. The second notification came a week later. This time, it was a payment that wasn't clear. A subscription he used for work, something he relied on without thinking about it. He mentioned it at dinner, irritation creeping into his voice. "That's weird," he said. "It's usually handled." I took a sip of water. "I know." He waited for more, an explanation, an apology, a solution. When none came, he filled the space himself. "Did you forget?" he asked. "No," I said calmly. That was when he really looked at me. "What do you mean no?" I mean, I didn't forget. There was a pause, not long, just enough to register. Well, he said, smiling tightly, can you fix it? And there it was, the assumption, the expectation, the muscle memory of control reaching for something that was no longer there. I can't, I said. He laughed. You can't? No. He shook his head like I was being dramatic. What do you mean you can't? It's not complicated. I met his eyes. I don't have an income anymore. The room went quiet. He blinked once, then again. What? I resigned, I said evenly. Last week. For a second he laughed the same way he had laughed at dinner. Dismissive, certain, very funny. I'm not joking. The smile faded, slowly, like a light dimming. You quit? He asked. Without telling me? Yes, why would you do that? I needed to. His voice sharpened. That's not an answer. It is, I said, just not when you like. He stood up then, pacing, running a hand through his hair. So you just decided to stop contributing? Is that it? I watched him carefully. The way his mind scrambled to reassert control, to find footing, to put me back where he was comfortable seeing me. I didn't quit to rely on you, I said. I quit to stop being managed. He scoffed. Managed? That's dramatic. Is it? He stopped pacing and turned toward me. So what's the plan? You expect me to just cover everything now? No, I said. I don't expect anything from you. That's when something shifted in his expression. Confusion mixed with irritation. Then what are you doing? I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. I stood, walked past him, and went into the bedroom. I opened a drawer he had never looked inside, pulled out a folder, quietly brought it back. Inside were bank statements, savings summaries, documents I had gathered slowly, deliberately. Money he didn't know existed. Accounts I had opened years earlier and never discussed. Not because I was hiding, but because I didn't feel safe explaining. His face changed as he flipped through the pages. What is this? He asked. My exit plan, I said simply. He looked up at me, disbelief flashing across his face. You planned this? Yes. For how long? A while. Silence filled the room, heavy and unfamiliar. This wasn't an argument. There was no shouting. No dramatic accusation. Just the uncomfortable sound of a narrative collapsing. You let me joke about your salary, he said slowly. You let me? I didn't let you, I said. You did it. I just stopped stopping you. That landed harder than anything else. Over the next few days, he tried different tactics. Concern, anger, rationalization. He asked if I was depressed, if someone at work had influenced me, if I was sabotaging us out of spite. I stayed calm. I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I didn't rush to reassure him. That was the part he couldn't stand. He needed a reaction, emotion, something to push against. Without it, his words sounded hollow, even to himself. One evening, he kept talking as I packed a small bag for the gym, explaining budgets, responsibilities, partnership, he said, over and over, as if repetition would make it real. I listened, nodded, and zipped the bag. As I walked past him toward the door, he was still talking. I didn't turn around. The silence that followed was louder than any argument we'd ever had. It settled into the apartment slowly, like dust, coating everything we didn't say. For the first time since we'd been together, there was no script. No familiar rhythm of accusation and repair. He didn't know how to talk to me without the assumption that I would soften whatever he said, and I didn't rush to fill the space. He tried, of course, not all at once. First, it was logistics. Questions about bills, timelines, contingency plans. He framed them as practical concerns, but I could hear the panic underneath. The certainty he carried so easily before had cracked, and now every question sounded like a test he was afraid to fail. I answered what mattered. I left the rest hanging. When he asked how long my savings would last, I said, long enough. When he asked what I planned to do next, I said, I'm not in a hurry. When he asked if this was about him, I said nothing at all. That unsettled him more than any accusation could have. For years, I had been the emotional regulator in our relationship, the one who smoothed conversations, translated tone, reassured intentions. Without realizing it, I had trained him to expect resolution, expect closure, expect that whatever discomfort he caused would be absorbed and neutralized. Now there was none. One night, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, papers spread out between us like evidence. He talked about us, about the future, about how marriages required compromise. His voice was calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. I watched the way his fingers tapped against the wood, just slightly out of rhythm. You're being distant, he said finally. That's not fair. I looked at him then, really looked, and realized how unfamiliar he suddenly seemed. Not because he had changed, but because I had stopped adjusting my perception to fit him. "I'm not being distant," I said. "I'm being honest." "That's the same thing," he snapped. "No," I replied. "It just feels the same to you." That was when I understood something important. His discomfort wasn't about money, it wasn't about planning. It wasn't even about control in the way people imagine it. It was about the loss of an audience, of someone who would reflect him back to himself in a flattering light. Without my reactions, his words fell flat. Without my reassurance, his authority sounded thin. The days took on a strange rhythm. We moved around each other carefully, like roommates who shared a history but no longer shared a language. He kept trying to initiate conversations that would pull me back into orbit. I kept declining without drama. I stopped fixing things. When something ran out, it stayed that way. When plans fell through, I didn't rush to rearrange them. When he vented about work, I listened without offering solutions, without validating, without cushioning. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it changed everything. One evening, he followed me from room to room, talking as I packed a box of old files. He explained his stress, his expectations, his disappointment. He waited for me to interrupt, to argue, to reassure him that this was temporary. I didn't. When I finally turned to face him, he was mid-sentence. His mouth stayed open for a moment after he realized I wasn't responding. "Are you even listening?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I just don't have anything to add." That hurt him more than yelling ever would have. The jokes stopped after that. Not because he had reflected, but because they no longer landed. There was no reaction to feed on, no laughter to validate him, no silence to exploit. Without my participation, the behavior lost its purpose. He grew restless. Irritable, he accused me of shutting down, of punishing him, of turning into someone cold. I let him believe whatever he needed to, because the truth was simpler. I wasn't cold. I was finished explaining myself to someone who only listened when it served him. One morning, I left early and walked along the river again. The same stretch near Michigan Avenue, the same slow water, the same steady movement. I realized how much of my energy had gone into managing another person's comfort, how little of it I had ever reserved for myself. When I came home that afternoon, he was sitting on the couch, staring at his phone. He looked up as I set my bag down. "Are you leaving?" he asked. The question surprised me, not because I hadn't considered it, but because of the way he asked. Not angry, not accusing, just uncertain. "I'm giving us space," I said. "For how long?" "I don't know." He nodded slowly, like he was trying to process a language he didn't speak. That night, we slept in the same bed, backs turned, an invisible line between us. I didn't feel sad. I felt clear. There's a difference. Over the next few weeks, he tried one last tactic: vulnerability. He talked about his fears, his childhood, the pressure he felt to succeed. He framed it as self-awareness, as growth. I listened, truly listened. And then I did nothing with it. No forgiveness, no immediate reconciliation, no emotional reward. That was the moment he realized this wasn't a phase, that I wasn't negotiating, that I had already moved on internally, even if my body was still in the room. The marriage didn't explode. There was no dramatic confrontation, no slammed doors. It did something worse, at least for him. It went quiet. Conversations shortened. Eye contact faded. The space between us grew heavier, not with tension but with absence. He would talk and I would leave the room. He would explain and I would nod without responding. He would ask questions and I would answer only what was necessary. I stopped cushioning his ego. I stopped translating his intentions for him. I stopped reacting. The last image I have of us together is simple. He was standing in the living room, mid-sentence, explaining something about finances again. I picked up my coat, my keys, and walked past him. He kept talking. I didn't turn around. That's how the power shifted. Not through confrontation, not through revenge, through absence, through silence, through the refusal to perform a role I had outgrown. And that, more than anything else, was something he never learned how to control. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more interesting stories like this.